First example in this video is here. If you want to pause to write it down, but before that, the two first places we're going to start are what we started on the other page. We want to find the domain and the lowest common denominator. So when you pause the video, you might write the problem down and see if you can find each of those things for me first before you start it back up. Okay, your turn. In order to find either the domain or the lowest common denominator for both of those items, we have to have the denominators here factored. So I will break those down first. Then if I'm working to find the numbers, maybe I'll put them side by side like this. The numbers to exclude from the domain, I have to set each of those factors equal to 0, and I need to solve for x. So when I solve x plus 3 equals 0 for x, I get x equals negative 3. When I solve x minus 2 equals 0 for x, I get x equals positive 2. And when I solve x plus 2 equals 0 for x, I get negative 2. Okay. I'm going to slide these around because I want to be able to write beside this other guy here. Also, now that I have it broken down, I can start building the lowest common denominator. Working from left to right on my fractions, it says, well, I need an x plus 3, and I need an x minus 2. When I hop to the next one, it says I need x plus 2, and I don't have that yet, but x minus 2, already there. When I hop to the last one, x plus 2, already there, x plus 3, also there. So in green up at the top, there's my lowest common denominator. Underline this guy. Keep them separate. So when I am working with that lowest common denominator, I need to multiply it through by both sides of the equation. That means every single piece on both sides of the equation gets multiplied by all three of these factors. I'm going to write it this way here, which is easier for me to distinguish since I'm in green. In your pencil or a pen at your desk, that might be a little trickier. Okay, we can get to where we maybe spread out the problems a little bit more when we write them down. Okay, but all three of those terms, the first guy minus the second guy equals the third guy, all three of those get multiplied by all three of those factors. When I come back then, I could start reducing and say, well, those two are gone from here. These two are gone from there. These two are gone from here. I forgot to pause and tell you to pause it again, but next time do that in the middle step. So what we have left is 4 times x plus 2 minus 1 times x plus 3 equals 2 times x minus 2. This is an equation we should know how to solve for x. Go ahead and pause it, solve for x, and then turn it back on when you want to see if you're right. Maybe I don't need to be that small. Okay, before I circle negative 9, I come back up to my domain. I make sure negative 9 is not on the list of numbers I have to avoid. And it's not, so I say there's my solution to that equation. X equals negative 9. Here's my next problem. Again, at your desk, I ask in a moment that you pause it so you can take a minute to find the domain. Tell me the number or numbers that we have to avoid, and also find me the common denominator, the lowest of the common denominators, please. Go ahead and pause and try that now. of the three denominators that we have, the only one that factors is the one on the right. So when I start working toward finding the domain, I want to know when x plus 1 is 0 and when x minus 1 is 0, and the same two factors happen again on the right one. So the two numbers I have to avoid are -1 and +1. If I solve these each for x. When I start building the lowest common denominator, I take the first factor there, that's the only one. I take the only factor from the second one, and when I compare, the third one just has those two terms, and so I know that's my lowest common denominator. Next step is to multiply both sides of the equation by that common denominator, which means every term gets multiplied by both of these things here. Okay, now's a good time to pause, see if you can clean it up, solve what's left, see what happens. The cleanup step, I get to start marking things out. What should mark out is all of the denominators should mark out. And then we just look at what is left. Along with the x minus 1 on top is that 3. Along with the 1 is x plus 1. And no, I don't have to write the 1 out in front if I don't like it. And there's -2. Distribute. That's x plus 1 minus 2. I'm combining steps into one. Right, so when I solve that equation for x, I get x equals 1. X equals 1. If I peek at my time, if we compare to the list up here in the domain, it says, x cannot equal 1. So I have to mark it off. I can't keep it on my list. If I solve for x, 1 was my only option, and I'm told I can't use the number 1. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I can't use the number 1 for x. Notice that leaves nothing left on my list. If there's nothing left on my list, I stop and say there's no solution to this equation. Okay, now remember, no solution can be written in words, no solution. Okay, or instead, if you would rather use the empty set symbol, 0 with a line through it, also means no solution. But if I mark off the only number on my list, there's nothing left on my list, so there's no solutions. Okay, there are examples, there are problems where maybe, and maybe I've got one of those, hopefully on one of these slides, where you started out with 2 numbers, and then you find out one of them's no good. You still get to keep the other one. Okay, so keep whatever's left on the list after you've taken the domain into account. But if there's nothing left, then you tell the reader, no solution there. All right, so this one, it'd be a great idea to go ahead and give it a shot from beginning to end. Follow the path that we took before. Find the domain, find the lowest common denominator, multiply it through, reduce things, solve what's left, check against the domain before you circle your answers. Two numbers that we get to restrict our domain, the two numbers we're not allowed to use there should be +2 and -2. If we set each of the factors equal to 0 and solve for x, we get those from there. The lowest common denominator that we're going to work with has an x minus 2 in it, it has an x plus 2 in it, and that covers all the ground that we need. So next we'll multiply every term on both sides. Maybe I'll stick it here in whatever order you like best, because I change it every time. Okay, multiply through. Next, we're going to cancel the pieces that go away. Then we're going to write down what's left. And then we're going to solve. I'm going to go here. I'm also going to do this all in one step for space and time. Okay, I've done something wrong, so I'm going to pause and see what I did. Okay, I wrote too fast. This is a 55, so that means x equals 5. When we check against the domain, we say, well, 2 and negative 2 are the only numbers we have to avoid. I'm safe with 5, so I'll circle it and go on. Okay, that looks like the last one I had written down for now. So get a hold of me if you need help with these ideas and want to see some more.